Lady Seraphina de Valois was a peace offering, a gilded trophy handed over to the enemy. She was forced to marry Lord Alistair Hawke, the Wolf of Northwood, a man whose name was only ever spoken in hushed whispers of his battlefield brutality. She arrived at his cold, northern fortress, expecting chains, a cold bed, and a cruel master. What she found was silence, a husband who refused to speak, guards at her door, and a court of vipers. She was a prisoner, just as she had feared, until the first attempt on her life. And the only thing that saved her was the silent, terrifying shadow of her husband's sword. The bells of the city cathedral did not ring for a celebration. They tolled a death knell. They were the sound of Lady Seraphina de Valois' freedom dying, one hollow chime at a time. Below her balcony, the capital of her homeland, Montvert, was draped in the conquering banners of the kingdom of Eldoria. The war was over. Her father, the Duke de Valois, had lost. The price for his surrender, the price for peace, was his only daughter. She was to be wed to the man who had personally broken their armies, Lord Alistair Hawke, Duke of Northwood, the King of Eldoria's most favoured and most feared warlord. Seraphina stared at her reflection in the polished silver mirror. The woman looking back was a stranger, pale and wide-eyed, already bound in a wedding gown of heavy ivory silk. It was a gift from the Eldorian king, a gesture that felt more like dressing a sacrificial lamb than welcoming a new Duchess. Her ladies-in-waiting, a mix of her own weeping attendants, and two stern-faced Eldorian women, fussed with the veil. "He is a monster, my lady," whispered her own attendant, Amelie, her hands trembling as she fixed a pearl pin. "They call him the Wolf of the North. They say he feeds his hounds on the flesh of his enemies." "Hush, Amelie," Seraphina whispered back, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "You will have us both flogged before I am even his." The rumours about Alistair Hawke were the currency of the terrified populace. He was the most desired duke in the kingdom because he was impossibly powerful, impossibly wealthy, and, according to the few court ladies who had glimpsed him, impossibly handsome. But he was also a ghost who haunted his own victories. He never spoke in council, only observed. He never celebrated at feasts. And on the battlefield, he was not a man but a force of nature, a silent, armoured reaper. He had a jagged scar running from his left temple down his jaw, a permanent reminder of his ruthlessness. Seraphina expected chains. She expected a life of brutal servitude, a political prisoner trapped in her husband's bed, forced to bear heirs for the man who had destroyed her home. The journey north to Hawke's Crest, his ancestral seat, was a blur of cold winds and towering, unforgiving mountains. The lush, sun-dappled valleys of Montvert gave way to stark pine forests and grey stone. The castle itself did not rise from the landscape so much as it dominated it. It was a fortress of black granite, perched on a cliffside, overlooking a churning, steel-grey sea. It was a place built to withstand sieges, not to house a high-born lady. Her husband-to-be did not ride out to meet her. She was escorted into the great hall by his captain of the guard, a grim-faced man named Rolf, whose armour bore the snarling wolf's head of the Hawke crest. The hall was vast and cold, warmed only by a cavernous fireplace. Standing before it, flanked by his household, was the Duke. The rumours had not done him justice. He was taller than she had imagined, with a breadth of shoulder that his formal black doublet did little to conceal. His hair was as dark as the granite of his castle walls, and his eyes were a startling, pale grey, the colour of the sea mist. And then there was the scar. It pulled at the corner of his mouth, giving him an expression of a permanent, cold sneer. He didn't smile. He didn't bow. He simply watched her approach, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical weight. Seraphina stopped a few feet from him and sank into the deepest curtsy her trembling legs could manage. "Your Grace," she murmured to the stone floor. Silence. The silence stretched, agonizing and heavy. She could hear the crackle of the fire, the nervous shuffle of her own attendants. She rose slowly. He had not moved. He had not welcomed her. He had not even spoken her name. A priest, looking just as terrified as she felt, stepped forward. "Your Grace, my lady, if you would." The wedding ceremony was the coldest 30 minutes of Seraphina's life. It was held right there in the hall, with only his household and her depleted retinue as witnesses. When it came time for the vows, Seraphina spoke hers in a clear, though fragile, voice. Then it was his turn. The priest prompted him. "Repeat after me, Your Grace. I, Alistair." The Duke said nothing. He simply stared at Seraphina. His pale eyes raked over her, stripping her bare of her silken veils, seeing the terror beneath. He gave a single, sharp nod. The priest swallowed. And do you, Lord Alistair Hawke, take this woman, Seraphina de Valois, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Another nod. Sharp. Final. The priest, desperate to finish, hurried. "Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." He flinched as the Duke turned his gaze on him. "You may kiss the bride, Your Grace." Seraphina's breath hitched. This was it, the first degradation. She closed her eyes, bracing for a brutal kiss, for a hand to grab her hair, to claim her like a spoil of war. Instead, a gloved hand gently tilted her chin up. She opened her eyes. The Duke was looking at her, his expression unreadable. He was a mask of cold nobility. He leaned down, and his lips brushed her forehead, a touch so light it was like a whisper of frost. It was not a kiss of passion, or even of greeting. It was an acknowledgement, a seal on a contract. He stepped back. "Captain Rolfe!" His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, shocking after the profound silence. It was the first time she had heard it. "Escort the Duchess to her chambers. Post the watch." Seraphina froze. "Post the watch?" Her husband turned away, already walking toward a dark corridor, his black cloak billowing. He didn't look back. "She is not to be disturbed, by anyone." Captain Rolfe motioned to her. "This way, Your Grace." 2 guards, bearing the hawk crest, followed them. They escorted her to a vast, opulent bedchamber, far from the Duke's own wing. Her attendants hurried in with her trunks. "My lady," Captain Rolfe said from the doorway, "your guard." The 2 armored men stationed themselves outside her door. Seraphina rushed to the doorway, her wedding dress tangling around her legs. "Are you locking me in?" "The Duke's orders, Your Grace," the captain said, his face impassive. "You are not to be disturbed. For your protection." "Protection? Or imprisonment?" She shot back, her fear finally giving way to a spark of her old fire. The captain's gaze was steady. "At Hawk's Crest, Your Grace, they are often the same thing." He bowed and retreated, leaving her with the heavy, final sound of the 2 guards taking their positions. Seraphina leaned against the closed door, the heavy oak cold against her back. The chains were not made of iron. They were made of silence, of stone, and of the 2 armored men standing guard outside her new life. The first week of Seraphina's marriage was a study in profound isolation. Hawk's Crest was a silent fortress, and she was its most prized, most isolated prisoner. She saw her husband only once a day, at the evening meal, which they took in the cavernous great hall. He sat at the head of the long, dark table, and she sat to his right, a symbolic gulf of polished wood between them. He never spoke to her. He would eat with a single-minded focus, his eyes on his plate. He would respond to the reports from Captain Rolfe or his steward, Mr. Dryden, with a clipped yes, no, or see it done. But to Seraphina, he offered nothing. No greeting, no questions about her comfort, no acknowledgement of her existence beyond a cold, assessing glance as she entered the hall. Her days were spent in her chambers, which were more of an opulent suite. She had a sitting room, a bedroom, and a balcony that overlooked the furious northern sea. And always, there were the 2 talons, as she learned his elite guards were called, outside her door. They were polite, but utterly immovable. When she wished to walk, they walked with her, 10 paces behind. When she wished to visit the library, they stood at the door. She was the Duchess of Northwood, and she had never felt less powerful. The household staff, from the steward Dryden to her new lady-in-waiting, a stoic northern woman named Miss Gretna, treated her with a chilling, detached deference. They were not unkind, but they were not warm. They were his people, loyal to the wolf, and she was the foreign bride, the price of a peace they clearly hadn't asked for. The true vipers of the court, however, were not the staff. They were the visiting nobility, the sons and daughters of the Duke's vassals, and none was more venomous than Lady Beatrice Craven. Lady Beatrice was a northern beauty, with hair the colour of spun gold and eyes as sharp and blue as ice chips. Her family, the Cravens, had been allies of the Hawks for generations, and it was an open secret that Beatrice had fully expected to be the next Duchess of Northwood herself. She had been at the castle for the silent wedding, her eyes boring into Seraphina's back, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Seraphina encountered her in the library. Seraphina had been trying to find a history of the region, hoping to understand the man she had married. She was reaching for a heavy tome when Lady Beatrice appeared at the end of the aisle. "Lost, Your Grace?" Beatrice's voice was sweet, like honey poured over glass. "Just browsing, Lady Beatrice," Seraphina replied, forcing a polite smile. Her guards stood, as ever, by the library entrance. Beatrice glided closer, her silks rustling. "It must be so difficult for you. This cold, hard place. It's nothing like the perfumed courts of Montvert, is it? We are a simpler people here. More robust." She ran a finger along the spine of a book. "And our Duke? He is a very particular man. He does not suffer weakness or frivolity." "I am aware of the Duke's reputation," Seraphina said, her spine stiffening. "Oh, but are you?" Beatrice smiled, a predatory baring of teeth. "You see, we understand him. We know that his silence is a weapon. He uses it to unnerve his enemies, to make them babble, to reveal their secrets." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He's probably listening to you right now, you know. Waiting for you to betray yourself. Waiting for a single sign that you are your father's daughter." A cold dread trickled down Seraphina's back. Was that it? Was this a test? Was he waiting for her to break? "I have nothing to hide, Lady Beatrice," Seraphina said, pulling the book from the shelf. "We shall see," Beatrice murmured. "Hawk's Crest has a way of breaking things, especially fragile, foreign things." The subtle torment escalated. At dinner, Beatrice would regale the table with stories of the war, praising the Duke's brilliant and merciless tactics in the campaign against Montvert, all while casting sympathetic, false glances at Seraphina. She was painting Seraphina as the defeated enemy, the outsider, while simultaneously reminding Alistair of his martial prowess and her own northern loyalty. The Duke, as always, said nothing. He simply ate, his scarred face a mask. The first physical incident happened 3 days later, Seraphina was descending the grand staircase, a winding monstrosity of black granite, on her way to the dining hall. Her 2 Talon guards were, for the first time, not directly with her. They had been waiting at the top of the stairs, but Seraphina had asked for a moment, and they had respectfully held back, though they were still visible. Lady Beatrice and 2 of her ladies were ascending. They met Seraphina in the middle of the wide staircase. "Your Grace," Beatrice said, dipping into a shallow, almost mocking curtsy. She was blocking the centre of the stair. "Lady Beatrice," Seraphina replied, moving to the side to pass them. As she did, one of Beatrice's companions, a mousy girl who always mirrored her mistress, seemed to stumble, bumping hard into Seraphina. Seraphina was thrown off balance, her slipper skidding on the polished stone. She gasped, flinging her hands out as she pitched forward toward the long, hard drop to the entry hall below. A scream died in her throat. An iron grip seized her arm. She was yanked back from the brink, pulled so hard she stumbled into a wall of armor. It was one of her guards. He had moved with inhuman speed, clearing the dozen steps between them in a second. He held her steady, his gloved hand a vice on her upper arm. "My lady," his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Are you harmed?" Seraphina was shaking, her heart in her throat. No, I am fine." "Oh, goodness!" Lady Beatrice cried, her hand flying to her chest in false panic. "How clumsy of you, Your Grace! You must watch your step. These old stones can be so treacherous." The guard's head swiveled, his gaze beneath his helmet locking onto Beatrice. He said nothing, but the menace was so palpable that Beatrice's smile faltered. He released Seraphina's arm, moved to her side, and motioned down the stairs. "Allow me to escort you, Your Grace. The steps are uneven here." He led her down the rest of the way, his hand hovering near her back, a silent, armored shield. When they reached the bottom, he glanced back up at the frozen women on the stairs before turning to her. "My apologies, Your Grace. We will remain closer." Seraphina looked at the guard, truly seeing him for the first time. He was not her jailer. He had just saved her life, or at the very least, saved her from a very serious injury. She walked into the dining hall, her composure rattled. Alistair was already there, nursing a cup of wine. He looked up as she entered, his pale eyes narrowing slightly. He took in her pale face, the slight tremor in her hands. He glanced at the guard who had followed her in, who gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. Alistair's gaze snapped back to her. He said nothing, but as Lady Beatrice entered the hall a moment later, flushed and angry, his eyes followed her to her seat. He watched her for a long, silent minute, his fingers tapping a slow, cold rhythm on the arm of his chair. It was the first sign of anything, a quiet, terrifying assessment. Seraphina realized Beatrice had been wrong. The Duke's silence wasn't a weapon, it was a vantage point. He wasn't listening, he was watching. The near fall on the staircase shifted something in Seraphina. The fear remained, but it was now threaded with a sharp, insistent curiosity. Her husband was a silent enigma. His court was a den of vipers, and her guards were apparently the only thing keeping her from accidents. She needed to understand the man who held her life in his silent hands. She began to watch him. She learned his routines. He rose before dawn, spending the first hours of light in the training yard. He spent his midday in his study with his steward and captain, managing his vast, unforgiving lands. His evenings were for the obligatory meal, followed by more solitude. He was a man of iron discipline. One morning, driven by a restless need to escape her chambers, Seraphina had her guards escort her to the battlements overlooking the training yard. She kept herself hidden in the shadow of a turret, watching. Alistair Hawke was not just a warrior. He was a master. He was sparring with Captain Rolfe, and it was not a gentleman's duel. It was a brutal, beautiful, and terrifying dance. He moved with a grace that belied his size, his great sword an extension of his arm. He didn't use brute force. He used precision, leverage, and a speed that was almost unnerving. He was, Seraphina realized with a cold chill, a perfect killing machine. He disarmed Rolfe, the sword clattering on the stones, and had the blunt edge of his own blade at his captain's throat in the space of a single breath. He stood there for a moment, breathing evenly, the pale morning light catching the silver threads in his dark hair. He was not a monster. A monster was chaotic. He was controlled. He was deliberate. A new arrival in the castle courtyard pulled her from her observations. A small party of riders, bearing the azure and gold banner of her father, the Duke de Valois. Seraphina's heart leapt. Hope, sudden and bright, flooded her. They had come for her. Her father had sent men to check on her, to ensure her safety. She hurried down from the battlements, her guards trailing her, and arrived in the great hall just as the lead rider was being brought before the Duke, who had been summoned from the yard. The rider pulled down his hood. "Cousin," he cried, his face splitting into a wide, familiar grin. "Gaston," Seraphina breathed, rushing forward. Gaston de Valois, her first cousin, caught her hands. He was the picture of Montverre nobility, handsome, charming, with a poet's sensitive eyes and a ready smile. He was the brother she never had. "Seraphina, my dear, look at you." "A duchess," he said, though his eyes darted nervously past her, to the silent, imposing figure of her husband. Alistair stood by the fire, still in his damp training leathers, his great sword resting in the crook of his arm. He looked like a barbarian king, observing a courtly intrusion. "Gaston, what are you doing here?" Seraphina asked, her joy palpable. "Your father, the Duke, was worried sick," Gaston said, projecting his voice for the whole hall to hear. "He feared for your safety. Married to—" He glanced at Alistair again. "Married so far from home. He sent me with a wedding gift, and to see with my own eyes that you are well." I am, Seraphina said, the lie tasting like ash. Gaston presented a small, velvet-wrapped box. "From your father, to remind you of home." Seraphina opened it. Inside, nestled on silk, was a heavy, ornate locket bearing the de Valois crest. It was beautiful. "Please thank him for me." "I shall when I return," Gaston said. He turned to the Duke and offered a bow that was just a shade too shallow. "Your Grace, I thank you for your hospitality. I bring greetings from Montverre." Alistair Hawke's pale eyes rested on Gaston. He did not return the greeting. He simply nodded, once, to Captain Rolfe. "See to Mr. de Valois' accommodations. He is our guest." He turned and left the hall without a single word to his wife or her cousin. Gaston watched him go, a look of contempt flashing across his face. "My poor cousin," he whispered, taking her arm, "to be shackled to such a savage, a man of no words, no breeding. It is a travesty." "He is quiet," Seraphina defended, though she didn't know why. "He is a brute," Gaston insisted. "But do not worry. I am here now. I will not leave you to his mercy." Gaston's presence was a balm for the first few days. He was a piece of home, a friendly face in the sea of cold northern stares. He walked with her, dined with her, and openly sneered at the primitive nature of Hawke's Crest. He also seemed intent on provoking her husband. At dinner, he would direct charming, faintly flirtatious compliments at Seraphina, pointedly ignoring the Duke at the head of the table. Alistair watched it all, his face impassive, his silence heavier than any threat. The incident that changed everything happened 2 days later. Gaston had insisted Seraphina show him the coastline. "You must ride, cousin. You cannot let this northern chill seep into your bones. Show me that you are still a de Valois." Seraphina, eager for a taste of freedom, agreed. She had her stable master, a gruff man named Hob, prepare her favourite mare, a spirited bay she had brought from Montvert. Her 2 Talon guards, as usual, prepared to follow. They rode out, Gaston keeping a lively chatter, Seraphina feeling the wind whip her hair for the first time in weeks. They galloped along the high cliffs, the sea roaring below. "Faster, Seraphina!" Gaston challenged. She urged her mare on, leaning low. The horse responded, stretching its legs. And then Seraphina felt a sharp snap. The saddle, suddenly loose, shifted violently under her. The mare, spooked by the sudden imbalance, neighed in terror and bolted, tearing toward the cliff's edge. Seraphina screamed, clinging to the mare's neck, the saddle sliding precariously to the side. She pulled on the reins, but the horse was in a blind panic. The cliff edge, a sheer drop to the rocks below, was yards away. "Gaston! Help me!" she shrieked. Gaston was behind her, his face pale with shock. "Seraphina! The reins! They're not working!" A black shadow exploded past her. It was Alistair. He had been riding behind them, a silent, unseen escort, mounted on his massive black warhorse. His horse, a trained charger, slammed into the side of her panicking mare, forcing it away from the edge. Seraphina was thrown by the impact. She fell from the saddle, but she didn't hit the ground. An arm like a steel band wrapped around her waist, plucking her from mid-air and hauling her across the front of his own saddle. It was all over in 3 heart-stopping seconds. She was pressed against his chest, her face buried in his leather doublet. She could feel the thrum of his heart, steady and strong, and the coiled power in the arm that held her. He reined his warhorse to a sharp halt, the animal perfectly obedient. Her own mare, its momentum broken, trotted to a nervous stop a few feet away, the saddle hanging beneath its belly. Seraphina was gasping, trembling so violently she couldn't speak. Alistair did not comfort her. He did not ask if she was all right. He held her secure with one arm, his gaze fixed on her mare. Gaston rode up, his face ashen. "By the saints! Alistair, your grace! That was—" Alistair silenced him with a look. He gently, almost impersonally, set Seraphina on her feet. Her legs buckled, and one of her guards, who had just caught up, steadied her. The Duke dismounted. He walked to her mare, his movements deliberate. He calmed the horse with a single, low word. Then his eyes narrowed. He knelt and examined the saddle. He picked up a leather strap from the ground. It was the girth, the main strap that held the saddle in place. He held it up. The leather had not broken. It had been cut. Sawn through, almost to the end, designed to hold for a time, and then snap under pressure. A low, animalistic growl rumbled in Alistair's chest. It was the most emotion she had ever seen from him. It was pure, unadulterated rage. He turned, not to Seraphina, but to Gaston. His pale eyes were chips of ice. He held up the severed strap. Gaston's face went white. I don't understand. A faulty strap?" Alistair's gaze then shifted, moving past Gaston to the 2 Talon guards. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind like a blade. "Find Hob. Bring him to the hall. Now." He strode to his horse, mounted in one fluid motion, and then looked down at Seraphina. He said nothing. He simply nudged his horse forward, stopping beside her. He leaned down and, without a word, offered her his gloved hand. She looked at the hand, then up at his scarred, terrifying face. This was the second time he had saved her. He was the wolf. And he was, without question, the only reason she was still alive. She placed her trembling hand in his. The great hall at Hawk's Crest had never felt colder. Seraphina sat in a chair by the fire, a heavy blanket wrapped around her, though the chill she felt was bone deep. She was sipping a hot, spiced wine that Miss Gretna had pressed into her hands, but the cup rattled against her teeth. Alistair stood in the centre of the room, his back to the fire, the severed saddle strap dangling from his fist. The stable master, Hob, was dragged in by 2 guards, his face pale and sweating. "Your Grace!" Hob stammered, his eyes wide with terror as he saw the strap in the Duke's hand. I checked the tack myself. I swear it. It was sound." Alistair stalked toward him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The quiet menace rolling off him was more terrifying than any shout. "You checked it?" It was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace. This morning. Before the guest." Hob's eyes flickered to Gaston, who was standing near the wall, trying to look concerned. "Who else had access to the stables?" Alistair's voice was a low rasp. "Only my lads. And Lady Beatrice was there this morning, sir, asking for her palfrey. And Mr. de Valois. He came to inspect my lady's mare before the ride. Said he was concerned for her safety." Gaston straightened. "I did. I was merely ensuring my cousin's horse was sound. I found nothing wrong." Lady Beatrice, who had been summoned, swept into the hall. "Your Grace, I heard what happened. How dreadful. Is the Duchess all right?" She rushed to Seraphina's side, ignoring the Duke. "My poor dear, you look half dead." Alistair turned his head, his gaze pinning Beatrice. "You were in the stables, Lady Beatrice." Beatrice's hand fluttered to her throat. Yes. For a moment. To see to my own horse." "Hob, tell him." "Aye, Your Grace, she was," Hob confirmed, desperate. Seraphina watched, her mind racing. Beatrice, who had tried to push her down the stairs. Gaston, her charming cousin, who had insisted on the ride, who had pushed her to go faster. One of them, or perhaps both, had tried to kill her. Alistair looked from Hob to Beatrice, then to Gaston. His eyes were flat, assessing, like a judge weighing a soul. Finally, his gaze settled on the stable master. "You are responsible for the Duchess's safety in the stables, Hob. You failed." "Your Grace, I swear, it wasn't me." Hob fell to his knees. "I know," Alistair said. The words dropped into the silence like stones. Hob looked up, stunned. Alistair's gaze slid to Lady Beatrice. "You have coveted your position in this house for a long time. You saw the Duchess as an obstacle." Beatrice paled. "How dare you? I am a craven. I would never—" "You would," Alistair stated. "You are petty, and you are cruel. But you are not subtle. A cut strap? That is an assassin's work, not a jealous woman's. It leaves too much to chance. A fall, an injury, not a death." He turned, his full attention landing on Gaston de Valois. Gaston, who had been watching with a detached sort of pity, suddenly found himself the sole focus of the Wolf of Northwood. He visibly tensed. "You, however," Alistair continued, his voice dropping even lower, "you needed her dead. Not just injured. Dead." "This is an outrage," Gaston blustered, his hand dropping to the hilt of his decorative sword. "You are accusing me. Her cousin. I was 50 feet behind her. You insisted on the ride. You inspected the horse. You pushed her to a gallop." Alistair listed the facts, each one a hammer blow. "I was making conversation. I was trying to lift her spirits." Gaston looked to Seraphina. "Seraphina, tell him. You know me. I would never harm you." Seraphina looked at her cousin, her childhood friend, and for the first time, she saw the frantic, calculating gleam in his sensitive poet's eyes. She saw the lie. But why? "Your Grace," she said, her voice shaking. I do not understand. Why would my own cousin, my own family, want me dead?" Alistair held her gaze. His eyes softened, just fractionally, and what she saw there was not coldness, but a deep, familiar weariness. He seemed to finally make a decision. He walked past Gaston, past Hob, and stood before her. He looked at her 2 Talon guards, then at Miss Gretna. "Leave us." "Your Grace?" Captain Rolfe, who had been silent by the door, stepped forward. "Is that wise?" "Leave us," Alistair repeated. "All of you. Take Mr. de Valois, Lady Beatrice, and Hob to their quarters. Under guard. They are not to speak to one another." The hall emptied, the protests of Gaston and Beatrice echoing until the heavy doors boomed shut. It was the first time Seraphina had ever been truly alone with her husband. The silence was deafening. Alistair stood by the fire, his back to her once more. "You believed me a prisoner," he said, his voice rough. Seraphina's breath caught. You gave me no other reason. Guards at my door. Silence. A cold welcome. What was I to think? "I gave you protection," he countered, turning to face her. His scarred face was taut with an emotion she couldn't name. The same protection I offered my first wife. It was not enough then, either. Seraphina gaped. "Your first wife? Amelia? She died 4 years ago. A fall from her horse." His eyes were haunted. "I thought it was an accident. It was not. It was a message from a rival house. By the time I uncovered the plot, she was already gone." He looked at Seraphina, and she saw the truth of his isolation. It was not cruelty. It was a fortress built around grief. "I did not want another wife," he said flatly. "The king insisted. This peace treaty, this marriage." He said the word like a curse. "I knew they would come for you." Who? Who would come for me?" Seraphina stood, letting the blanket fall. "Gaston? Why?" "Not just Gaston." Alistair walked to a heavy chest by the wall, unlocked it, and pulled out a rolled parchment. He handed it to her. "This was intercepted 3 days ago, by my men on the Montvert border." Seraphina's hands trembled as she unrolled it. It was coded, but the seal at the bottom was unmistakable. It was her father's. The Duc de Valois. "What is this?" she whispered. "It is a letter from your father to your cousin," Alistair said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The peace treaty was a lie, a ploy. Your father never intended to honor it. He is bankrupt. His lands are forfeit. His only chance is to restart the war. But he needs a reason. He needs a casus belli." Seraphina's blood ran cold. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with uncomprehending horror. "Oh, a what?" "A cause for war," Alistair stated. "He needed the savage Duke of Northwood to murder his innocent daughter. He sent you here to be a martyr, Seraphina. Your cousin Gaston was sent to ensure the accident happened, and to be the witness who would carry the tragic tale back to the world." Seraphina read the decoded script that was scrawled at the bottom of the letter by one of Alistair's spy masters. "Must be done quickly. The Wolf's brutality is known. Her death will ignite the borders. A saint for our cause." She sank back into the chair, the parchment slipping from her fingers. No, he wouldn't. He is my father. He loves me." "He loves Montvert," Alistair corrected, his voice harsh. "He loves his own power. You were a pawn, a sacrifice he was willing to make." Seraphina stared into the fire, the entire world shifting beneath her feet. Every memory of her father's tearful farewell was now a grotesque lie. Gaston's charm, his concern, his insistence on the ride. It was all a performance. They had sent her here to die. She had expected chains from her husband, but the true chains had been her own family, binding her to a fate she never saw coming. She looked up at Alistair Hawke, the Wolf of the North, the silent, brutal killer. He was standing guard over her, his expression grim. He had known this. He had known she was a target, and he had silently placed his men, his sword, his entire fortress between her and the doom her own father had planned. "You saved me," she whispered, the words tasting strange. "I saved my Duchess," he replied, his voice rough. "I will not fail another." The revelation shattered Seraphina. It was a betrayal so profound it hollowed her out, leaving her adrift in a sea of cold, harsh truths. Her father, her homeland, her entire past, it was all a lie. A gilded cage built to deliver her to her death. She spent the rest of the day in her chambers, the guards outside her door no longer a symbol of her imprisonment, but the only thing she trusted in the world. She did not weep. The shock was too deep for tears. Instead, a cold, hard anger began to crystallize in her chest. She had been used, cast as the tragic victim in her father's pathetic play. She would not play the part. That evening she dressed for dinner. She did not choose a somber gown. She wore a deep crimson velvet, the color of defiance. She placed the locket from her father, the gift that was likely meant to be found on her body, on her vanity, staring at its mocking crest. When she entered the great hall, there were 2 new guards at the entrance. The hall was subdued. Lady Beatrice was absent, confined to her rooms. Gaston too was missing. It was just her and Alistair, seated at the long, empty table. The silence, for the first time, did not feel hostile. It felt shared. Alistair watched her as she ate. She met his gaze, and he did not look away. She saw the man now, not the monster. She saw the exhaustion in his pale eyes, the tension in his scarred jaw. He was bearing the weight of this fragile piece and the weight of her life entirely on his own. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice clear and strong in the quiet hall. He looked surprised she had spoken. He set down his fork. "Gaston is in the dungeons. Lady Beatrice is confined to her quarters until she is sent home in disgrace tomorrow. Her accident on the stairs was an opportunistic cruelty. The saddle was treason. She will be dealt with. Hobb is being questioned. He is a fool, but I do not believe he is a traitor. And Gaston? He will be held as a hostage, and a witness, and my father." The word was venom. "Your father," Alistair said, a grim set to his mouth, "will hear that his plot has failed. He will receive a message that his daughter is alive, well, and under my protection. And he will be warned that if he makes a single move on the border, Gaston will be executed for treason and attempted murder, and the full might of Eldoria will descend on Montfer. This time, there will be no peace treaty." He was using her cousin as a shield, just as her father had tried to use her as a sword. It was a cold, brutal, and brilliant political move. "He will not stop," Seraphina said, surprising herself with her own certainty. "My father is a proud man, and a desperate one. He will see this as a setback, not a defeat. He will try again." Alistair nodded, a flicker of new respect in his eyes. "He will. Which is why your imprisonment must continue. It is the only way to keep you alive." "I will not be a prisoner," Seraphina stated, standing up. "Not yours, and certainly not his. I was a pawn. Now, I will be a player." Alistair raised an eyebrow, his scarred mouth twisting in what might have been a grim smile. "A player? And what game do you intend to play, Your Grace?" "Gaston is my cousin," she said, walking toward the fire. "He trusts me. He believes me to be a terrified, fragile girl. He thinks you are the monster." "Let him continue to think so." Alistair stood, his gaze intense. "What are you proposing?" "He is in your dungeons. He expects torture. He expects the wolf to come for him." She turned to face her husband. Send me to his cell. Let me be the sympathetic cousin. He will be desperate. He will tell me everything, the full extent of the plot, who his allies are, who else in this castle is in my father's pay." "No," Alistair said, the word a flat command. "It is too dangerous. He is a cornered animal." "He is the only animal you have in a cage," she shot back, her new anger making her bold. "You are a warrior, Your Grace. You understand tactics. To defeat an enemy, you must know his mind. I am the only one who can get inside his." She stepped closer to him, close enough to see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the stark white of the scar against his skin. "You said you would not fail another Duchess. Do not fail this one by underestimating me. I am not Amelia. I am not a fragile victim. I am a de Valois, and I will have my vengeance on the man who dishonored that name." He stared at her for a long, breathless minute. He saw the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes. He saw a woman who had been forged, not broken. "You mentioned," he said, his voice quiet, "that your father's allies might be in this castle. Hob, perhaps, or one of the staff. Or a visiting noble," Seraphina added. "The plot," Alistair said, thinking aloud, "was well funded. Your father is bankrupt. This requires gold. We intercepted reports that a large sum was moved through a neutral territory, handled by associates of the Medici banking family. Someone had to receive that gold on this side of the border. Gaston will know who," Seraphina insisted. Alistair looked at her, his mind made up. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Captain Rolfe will be outside the cell. You will wear a dagger. You will have 10 minutes. He was trusting her. It was a fragile, dangerous, and exhilarating feeling. She walked with him, not as his prisoner, but as his ally. As they reached the hall entrance, he paused. He looked down at her, his pale eyes searching her face. "Why?" he asked, the single word heavy with meaning. "Why do this? You could simply remain in your tower, safe." "Because," Seraphina replied, her voice low, "he sent me here to be murdered by a monster. He misjudged the monster." Alistair's hand went to his sword, a reflexive, protective gesture. "I am not—" "I know," she said, cutting him off. "I know what you are. You are the man who pulled me from a fall, the man who shielded me from my own blood. You are the Duke of Northwood. And I am your Duchess." She walked past him, toward the stairs that led to the dungeons, leaving him standing in the hall, the silent warrior finally, truly seen. The dungeons of Hawk's Crest were as cold and unforgiving as the stone they were carved from. The air was damp and smelled of salt and old despair. Seraphina, holding a lantern, followed Captain Rolfe down the winding steps, the small, sharp dagger Alistair had given her cold against her ribs. Gaston was in a cell at the end of the corridor. When he saw her, his face, pale and dirty, lit with a desperate, manic hope. "Seraphina! Thank the saints!" he cried, scrambling to the bars. "You must get me out of here! This savage has me in chains! He's a madman! He accused me of trying to harm you!" Seraphina played her part. She let her hands tremble, her eyes widen with fear. She shrank back, looking nervously over her shoulder at Captain Rolfe, who stood impassively at the end of the hall. "Gaston, what happened?" she whispered, moving closer. "The Duke. He is furious. He said, He said you cut my saddle." "It's a lie," Gaston hissed, his fingers gripping the bars. "He's trying to frame me. He wants to restart the war, Seraphina. He wants a reason to march on Montvert and seize it all. He's using this accident as his excuse. You are his pawn, don't you see?" It was a brilliant reversal. He was using her father's own plot and pinning it on Alistair. I don't know what to believe," Seraphina whispered, letting a tear trace its way down her cheek. "He has me under guard. I am his prisoner, Gaston." I know," he said, his voice becoming soothing, manipulative. "But I can get you out. We can escape. Your father, he has allies, friends, even here in this frozen hell." "Allies?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes, gold has bought many loyal men." He darted a look at Rolf, who was pointedly looking away. "The stablemaster, Hob, he's one of ours. He was supposed to ensure the accident was clean. The fool panicked, and Lady Beatrice, she was a useful distraction, but her greed made her sloppy." Seraphina's blood ran cold. Hob, and Beatrice had been in on it too, not just an opportunist. "How, Gaston?" she pleaded. "How can we escape? His guards are everywhere." Gaston smiled, a thin, feral grin that chilled her to the bone. "Not all of them are loyal to the wolf. There is a grand hunt planned in 3 days, a boar hunt. The whole castle will be in the woods. It is a tradition." "A hunt?" In the chaos of the chase, anything can happen. A stray arrow, a tragic accident. His eyes glittered. "This time, the accident will be for the Duke. Hob and another man will stage a boar charge. In the confusion, a crossbow bolt meant for the Duke will find its mark. And you and I will ride. We will ride for the coast, where a ship from Montvert is waiting." He reached through the bars, grabbing her hand. "You must help me, Seraphina. You must convince your husband to release me into your custody. Tell him you need a piece of home. Tell him my presence calms you. He is a fool. He wants his new Duchess to be docile. He will do it. And if he doesn't, then you must be ready at the hunt," Gaston said, his voice hard. "Be ready to ride." Seraphina pulled her hand back, feigning terror. I will try, Gaston. I will try." She fled, her heart pounding. She reported every word to Alistair in his study. He listened, his face a mask of stone, but his hand, resting on his sword hilt, was clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Hob," he growled. And Beatrice. She was not just jealous. She was a traitor, bought and paid for. "They plan to kill you," Seraphina said, the words catching in her throat. "At the hunt." "It is a good plan," Alistair said, a grim, cold light in his eyes. "A hunt is chaos. A stray bolt is easily explained." "Then you must cancel it," she insisted. "You must arrest them all." "No." He looked up, and she saw the strategist, the wolf, emerge. "If we arrest them now, your father will simply send another team. We know these vipers. We do not know the ones who wait in the shadows. We must end this, all of it." "How?" "We let the hunt proceed," he said. "That is madness," Seraphina cried. "You will be walking into a trap." "I will be setting one," he corrected. "Gaston wants to play a game of chaos. I am a master of chaos." He looked at her. "But I will need you. You are his ally. You are the key." The day of the hunt arrived. Cold and grey. The horn sounded, the hounds bayed, and the courtyard filled with nobles and horses. Alistair, in a calculated show of trust, had released Gaston into Seraphina's custody, though her cousin was forbidden from carrying a weapon. He rode beside her, his face a mask of concerned charm, whispering his escape plan. Lady Beatrice, surprisingly, was also there. "The Duke has graciously allowed me to ride," she'd trilled, to prove my loyalty. Alistair had allowed it. Keep your enemies close, Seraphina thought, her nerves screaming. Alistair himself rode at the head of the party, a magnificent, imposing figure. But Seraphina noticed subtle differences. Captain Rolfe and 10 of his best talons, men who should have been scouting, rode as a tight, protective ring around the Duke. They were not dressed for a hunt. They were dressed for war. They entered the woods. The horns blew, and the party split, chasing the hounds. "Now, cousin!" Gaston hissed, grabbing her reins. "We ride for the coast!" "No," Seraphina said, pulling her reins back. Gaston's face contorted. "What did you say?" "I said no." At that moment, a cry went up. "Boar! Boar!" From the trees to their left, Hob, the stable master, and another man burst from the undergrowth, chasing a massive, enraged boar directly toward the Duke. "It's begun!" Gaston snarled, drawing a hidden dirk from his boot. "You foolish girl, you will die with him!" He lunged for her. But Seraphina was ready. She spurred her horse, evading his grasp, as 2 of Alistair's hunting party, talons in disguise, intercepted him, tackling him from his horse. At the same time, Alistair saw the boar. He did not flee. He lowered his spear, a perfect picture of a calm huntsman. But his eyes were not on the boar. They were on the ridge to his right. "Now, Rolfe!" he roared. As the boar charged, a thwack sounded from the ridge. A crossbow bolt, aimed not at the charging boar, but at Alistair's heart. Lady Beatrice, who had been positioning herself for a clear view, screamed in triumph. But Alistair was already moving. His horse reared as he deflected the bolt with his reinforced gauntlet, the iron-tipped quarrel scraping off the steel with a sickening shriek. Before the assassin on the ridge could reload, Captain Rolfe and his men were on him. It was over in seconds. The boar was dispatched. Gaston was in chains. Hob and his conspirator were captured. And Lady Beatrice sat on her horse, her face a mask of white, stunned horror. Alistair Hawke trotted his horse over to her, the captured, trembling assassin dragged behind Rolfe's horse. He looked up at Beatrice, his face calm, his pale eyes lethal. "Your aim was off, my lady," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden, ringing silence of the forest. He did not need to shout. He did not need to rage. He held up the splintered crossbow bolt. "Treason," he said, loud enough for the entire hunting party to hear. "The penalty for which, as the cravens well know, is death." He turned his horse, his gaze finding Seraphina. He rode to her, his eyes searching her for any sign of fear or injury. She was shaking, but she met his gaze, her head held high. He offered her his hand, a silent question. "Are you with me?" She placed her hand in his, a silent answer. "I am." The wolf's purge was swift. Following Gaston's confession, Lady Beatrice and Hob were executed for high treason, their heads a grim warning against betraying the Duke. Alistair, in a brilliant political move, spared Gaston. He sent the confession to Seraphina's father, making it clear that Gaston's life was the new guarantee for peace. The war was truly over. The castle's atmosphere transformed. The staff, awed by her courage, finally saw Seraphina as their true Duchess. She became Alistair's partner in rule, not just his prisoner. One evening on the battlements, the silence between them finally broke. He confessed his fear of failing her, as he had his first wife. Seraphina replied that he had not given her chains. He had given her a sword and a choice. She had expected a monster but found her protector. As he finally kissed her with passion, not cold duty, the forced alliance was forged anew as a true marriage. The story of Seraphina and Alistair reminds us that the masks people wear, the savage warrior or the fragile dove, often hide the deepest truths. She came to him as a sacrifice, only to find that her true enemy was the home she left behind. and her greatest protector was the man she was forced to marry. Theirs was a love built not on flowery words, but on shared danger, silent understanding, and the unshakable strength of a true alliance. They were forged in fire and bound by steel. If you were captivated by the story of the silent Duke and his resilient Duchess, please don't let this be the end of our journey. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone else who needs a story of drama and unexpected romance. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories to tell, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thank you for listening.